Some things only happen in soap operas, and in real life too. Just ask the man who saw his daughter inside a sealed coffin and years later saw that same face begging at a traffic light. If you're the kind who loves a good story, hit that like button and subscribe, because if you don't, you're going to miss the rest of this tale I'm about to tell you, and I'll warn you, it's not for the faint of heart. It was a grey day, the sky stuffed with clouds, and his soul stuffed with grief. Alberto Fontes, the kind of man who ruled the world but lost his own, was burying what was left of his daughter, Carolina, 9 years old. Angelic face, starry eyes, died in a boating accident. At least that's what they said. Burned body, sealed casket. They only gave him a necklace and a photo, and it was that photo, tucked away in a worn leather wallet, that made his heart stop for 2 seconds, right there, stopped at a red light on Ave Banderas, window down, waiting for the light to turn green. "Sir, can I have a coin?" said the girl with a hungry voice and dusty clothes. Alberto, 67 years old and pockets heavier than a mother's heart, turned his head without thinking. But when he glanced in the rearview mirror, the world collapsed. The girl's face, it was the same, identical, even the little dimple on her chin. And it wasn't that kind of similar that grieving people convince themselves of. No, it was identical, like seeing a starving ghost knock on the window of an armored car. He got out. The driver shouted. The security guards stepped out of the car, but Alberto told them to shut up and chased after the girl. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice already trembling. "Carol," she said, frowning. "Carolina what?" "I don't know. Just Carolina." And the world spun hard. The girl ran, disappeared into the maze of people and street vendors, and there he stood, in the middle of the street, like an old stone in a flood. That night, he didn't sleep. He flipped through photos, documents, old newspapers, and more than anything, he flipped through his grief, because what he saw wasn't just longing. It was flesh, bone, and the same eyes. But who would believe that his dead daughter appeared alive, dirty and starving, in the middle of the street? Oh, that was just the beginning. What he discovered after made the whole world question the truth. The next morning, Alberto Fontes was a changed man. A man who spent decades believing he could control everything, from corporations to governors, couldn't even control the trembling in his hands. He'd spent the whole night staring at that one photo of his daughter, the same one he put in his pocket on the day of her burial, the same one that now seemed alive. He compared it, replayed the dashcam footage, paused, zoomed in. The pixels trembled, but the resemblance didn't. It was her. Not looked like, not resembled. It was her. But how? The body had never been identified. The casket was sealed. All that was left were ashes and a silver bracelet. And why had no one ever questioned it? Because when you have too much money, you bury even the doubts, he whispered, staring into his glass of whiskey like it was a mirror. That day, he told the driver to return to the same traffic light at the same time. Sat there with the window down, heart pounding like a schoolboy, waiting for the recess crush. Nothing. The second day, still nothing. But on the third day, when the sun was bowing out in burnt orange, she appeared again. Same shirt, same look. A grocery cart pulled by a makeshift belt, and a teddy bear. Torn, but with a button for an eye. Alberto choked. That bear was the same one he'd bought for her on her 7th birthday. He had a red button sewn in to replace the eye their dog had chewed off. And the girl's bear had a red button too. He got out of the car, heart racing, and walked toward the girl. She looked at him like someone you almost remember, but fear too. "Where did you get that bear?" "I've always had it," she replied, scratching her nose. "Who gave it to you?" "I don't remember. I think it was a lady." "What lady?" "She calls me her daughter, but she's not my mom. She tells me not to talk to men in suits." And that's when it clicked. Something was very wrong with this story, and had been for a long time. Because if the girl had the same face, the same name, the same bear, Then someone had lied. Someone had stolen his daughter, or worse, sold her. And the question started gnawing at his chest like a rat in a ship's hold. Who did they bury in Carolina's place? That night, he decided to do something he'd never done before. Seek the truth without a lawyer, without a publicist, without the media. Just him, and the living ghost of a daughter who may have never died. And little did he know that digging into this past would wake people who preferred to stay buried. They say, when you dig, you find. But no one warns you that what you find may be worse than what you lost. The next day, Alberto Fontes knocked on the door of someone he hadn't seen in 7 years, the coroner responsible for signing off on Carolina's body. His name was Helio Vasquez, 60-something, looked like he hadn't slept well since the 90s, and smelled like warm beer and regret. When he opened the door, he nearly dropped the bottle in his hand. "Dr. Alberto, my God, it's been years." "Cut the flattery, Helio. I'm here about my daughter's body." The silence that followed weighed more than the tie around Helio's neck. "What about the body?" "It was sealed, remember? They gave me a necklace, a photo, and told me to bury it fast. You were the one who signed the report." "I followed protocol. The body was unrecognizable, burned. And you thought I'd never ask questions?" Helio wiped sweat from his forehead. His eyes avoided Alberto's face like a thief dodging a flashlight. But then Alberto pulled a red button from his pocket. "This button was on a bear I gave my daughter, and today that same button was on the bear of a girl at the stoplight, a girl named Carolina." The color drained from Helio's face. He swallowed hard, almost dropped the bottle again. "What are you talking about?" "The same story you're going to tell me now, Helio, because if I find out you lied, it's going to take more than a report to save you." The old coroner sat down, took a deep breath and said, I got an order, a black folder. I signed without looking. They said the body was part of a bigger case, a diplomatic accident, something about international security protocol." "What protocol?" "I don't know. They paid me, Alberto. It was big people. People that, if you poke, you disappear." "What people, Helio?" "I don't know names, I just followed orders." But what came next was worse than a lie. It was a revelation. "What if I told you? The body you buried wasn't a child's." Alberto froze. "What?" "I reviewed the reports later, on my own. It was the body of a woman, an adult, even had signs of a cesarean." "Then why didn't you say anything?" "Because I wanted to live, Alberto. That's it." In that moment, the world flipped upside down. Because if the body in the coffin was someone else, then Carolina had never been dead. And the worst part, someone wanted him to believe she was. With that truth lodged in his chest, Alberto left with one truth and a gut-twisting question. Who buried a lie in place of his daughter, and why? Some things time hides but doesn't erase. And when truth decides to show its face, no lock can hold it. It barges in without asking and wrecks everything. That night, Alberto returned to the mansion without turning on a single light. He climbed the stairs as if carrying his own coffin, entered his daughter's room, the one he never had the courage to change. The doll on the shelf still smiled with a missing tooth. The unicorn lamp still sat there dusty. But what caught his attention was the little silver box on the dresser. Inside, it held a bracelet with Carolina engraved. It was the only item delivered with the death certificate. The necklace and the bracelet. But looking closely, he saw something he'd never noticed before. On the back of the tag, almost invisible, a tiny inscription. TSM 1703 FSR. It was a code, a clue, and it was all he needed. The next day, he sought out the only friend he had left in journalism. Arnaldo Teles, a retired reporter who could dig up a scandal with a teaspoon. "I need to know what this means," Alberto said, placing the bracelet on the table. TSM, FSR. Could be the name of an institution or a convent. The old reporter's eyes widened. "You think the church is involved?" "I don't think, I know. Carolina appeared at the stoplight, Arnaldo, alive, with a bear only she had." "My God!" and the coroner told me the body in the coffin was an adult woman. Arnaldo stood up. There's a convent in San Roque. The nuns care for orphan girls. The acronym is close. Filias de Santa Resurrección, FSR, and TSM. Maybe the name of an internal program. I know a sister who worked there. Sister Dolores, retired, sharp memory. 2 hours later, they were seated in a retirement home across from an elderly nun in a white veil and tearful eyes. Alberto placed the bracelet on the table. She looked at it and froze. "I know this," she whispered. "Where from, sister?" "This bracelet was used for girls undergoing the maternal silence treatment." "What?" "A project that existed briefly. We received girls who came through restricted adoptions. They couldn't have any contact with the past." "Why not?" "Because some were taken from families who didn't know the truth." "What do you mean?" "They were kidnapped, Alberto. Passed off as orphans." "Carolina. I remember her. I never forgot her face. She called for you at night. Called you Daddy. Cried. But over time, she stopped talking." The pain Alberto felt in that moment was dry, sharp, like a shot from inside. "Where is she now?" "I don't know," the sister said, choking back tears. "One day she disappeared. They said she was transferred. But I never believed it. It was official. His daughter had been stolen, and part of the church knew. And the most terrifying part? Carolina might still be under surveillance. There are truths so dangerous, they become sin just by whispering." And Alberto Fontes, a man who once had senators on his payroll, was now facing the only power that still scares millionaires, the one that speaks in God's name, but acts in the name of secrets. That night, he had a visitor. No doorbell. Didn't enter through the front gate, just appeared in his study, like he'd always been there. "Dr. Fontes," said the man in a dark suit and gold cross. "We need to talk." Alberto didn't recognize the face, but he recognized the scent. Power-wearing expensive cologne. "Who are you?" "Someone who protects the faith and the faithful." "So, a middleman for lies?" "I'm just a messenger, and the message is simple. Stop digging into the past." Alberto smiled, but it was that smile of a man who's already decided he's going to the end, even if he bleeds standing. "And if I don't stop, what you've uncovered could destroy many people, including yourself. They took my daughter." "And you talk to me about destruction?" The man stood, adjusted his coat, and said, like reciting a prayer, "Some daughters aren't taken, they're offered." The phrase echoed like a funeral bell in a cathedral. When Alberto blinked, the man was already gone. The next morning, Alberto reached out to an old contact from his days of pulling strings behind closed doors. Marco Braga, former private investigator, now head of a discreet investigations firm. "I need you to find everything about the FSR convent, the clandestine adoption project, and the name Carolina Fontes in any orphanage in the country. This won't be cheap. Money's not the problem. Time is." While Marco started digging, Alberto returned to the exact place he'd first seen the girl, the traffic light on Ave Banderas. And this time, she appeared. But something was different. 2 men in dress shirts with earpieces stood nearby, watching. They didn't ask for money, didn't speak to anyone, just observed. When he tried to approach the girl, she ran, but not into the street. She ran toward a white van parked on the corner, and the one who opened the door was a woman in a grey habit, a nun. The van sped off, vanished into traffic. Alberto ran after it, but lost it in the city's maze. There, kneeling on the hot sidewalk, he felt something in the pocket of his blazer, a piece of paper, a note, handwritten, trembling. "If you find me, don't tell anyone. They hear everything, Carol." It was her handwriting, the same as the old diary he kept locked in his safe. She was alive. She knew who she was, and more, she was scared. And if she was scared, that meant people with real power were telling her to stay silent. Some are born invisible, and some choose to stay blind. And in this country where children become statistics and hearts get crumpled like old receipts, the story of little Carolina was getting deeper, like a wound covered with a dirty rag, and prayers instead of stitches. Alberto Fontes, the man who once had a private jet with an onboard bartender, was now walking the city centre in a cap and old sweater, asking about a girl with a mended bear. Each stoplight was a sliver of hope, each street a shot at finding the piece of his heart he thought he'd buried. "Sir, I haven't seen that girl, but there's a crew that sleeps near the train tracks. Some kids know everything. They charge, but they deliver. Take me there." They reached an abandoned lot where metal scraps served as homes and fear made for blankets. There, he found Dente, a street kid of about 11, sharp-eyed, voice roughened by cigarettes. "Who you looking for, old man?" "A girl, Carolina. She has a teddy bear with a red button." "Oh, Carol Xenia. Saw her yesterday. She was with the combi nun." "You know where they go?" "I do. But it'll cost you." Alberto took off his watch, a Rolex worth more than the whole neighborhood. "Take me." Dente stared at the shine of the watch like he was seeing the sun for the first time, then nodded. "But we gotta move fast. If they see me, I'm gone." They wound through alleys not even GPS dares track, streets where even streetlights fear to flicker, until they arrived at an abandoned building, windows boarded, gate padlocked. That's the place. The van comes every day at 5. The nun brings food and meds. There are more kids, 3 or so, all silent, all scared. And her, Carolina, she only cries at night, whispers some names. One of them's Daddy. Alberto had to hold back from breaking down the gate then and there, but he knew, if he made a sound, he'd lose her again. That night he camped in his car. At 4:57 a.m. the white van pulled up. Same nun, same routine. She stepped out, unlocked the gate, entered, and locked it again. Alberto stepped out of the car, went to the side wall, climbed on a rusty drum, and peered through a cracked window. And there, among torn mattresses and colorless toys, she was, Carol, sitting, hugging her bear, staring into nothing with the eyes of someone who'd seen too much. But when she looked toward the window, she felt something. She turned slowly and met his eyes. For 1 second, time froze, and she smiled. A small, shaky smile, but full of a memory that had never died. That's when he heard the noise behind him. Footsteps, voices, and a man in a suit, just like the one from the night before, stood across the street. The noose was tightening, and now he knew. If he wanted to save his daughter, he'd have to steal her back. Some memories don't need words to hurt. Just a smell, a song, a look that looks back. Alberto spent the entire next day planning the impossible, to take Carolina out of that sacred cage without making a sound, leaving no trace, and giving the system no time to respond. Because now it wasn't just about reunion, it was about rescue. About reclaiming the one piece of his life that still carried innocence. He called Marco Braga, the old detective, and explained everything. "We'll have 30 seconds. One mistake, and she's gone again. There won't be a mistake. I know how to get in and out without the wind noticing." Alberto didn't ask how. He didn't want to know, because a man who's seen too much power knows it's better not to see the details. At 4:30 a.m., they were in position. The van arrived, right on time. The nun got out, key in the gate. Lock opened. That was the moment Marco acted. As she stepped inside, he slid a piece of molded plastic into the latch, preventing the padlock from catching when closed. They waited 2 minutes. Marco gave the signal. They entered. Inside, the place was part shelter, part prison. Makeshift beds, torn curtains, a bittersweet stench of mold and old lavender. Carolina was there. Lying down, eyes open, clinging to the bear. Alberto knelt beside her. He said nothing, just pulled from his pocket a tiny music box, the same one that played Claire de Lune, the one he'd used every night to lull her to sleep. He turned the key. The melody whispered like a eulogy. Her eyes lit up. She sat, looked at him, and said, for the first time in years, "Daddy!" He collapsed, wept then and there, but there was no time. A door slammed, heavy footsteps, muffled voices. Marco scooped her up in his arms. "Now!" They ran. dodging boxes, startled nuns, leapt over the gate. Marco stumbled, fell, but never let go of the girl. Alberto helped him up. They jumped in the car, sped off before the van could even reverse, heart in throat, hands trembling. But the silence in the back seat was different. Carolina, holding the bear, stared out the window with dry eyes, but a soul fully wrapped in her father's arms. "Are you really my daddy?" she asked softly. "I am, my daughter, and I'll never leave you again." She rested her head on his shoulder and said, "The lady said if I remembered, they'd hurt me. No one will ever touch you again, I promise." But neither of them knew that while they escaped, an old camera hidden in a corner of the wall was streaming everything live. On the other end, in an office with stained glass windows and crucifix-covered walls, a man watched, silent, wearing a slight smile. "So the piece left the board," he murmured. And now, the question wasn't if Alberto could protect his daughter. It was, for how long? Because some wars don't begin with gunfire. They begin with silence. And in that silence hide screams, strangled truths, and stolen children trained to forget. Alberto and Carolina hid in a remote house in the mountains where even satellites couldn't find signal. It was an old family property, buried in forgotten records with wooden shutters and the scent of burned firewood. The first few days, she barely spoke, slept curled up, flinched at the doorbell, but little by little, she opened up. And on a cold night, sitting by the fire, Carolina said what her father both hoped for and feared. "Daddy, do you remember the lady who taught me to forget you?" He froze. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "She told me you were a lie, that I came from another belly, that my name was different. But I knew it wasn't true. I remembered your hug. What was her name?" "Sister Justina." The name hit like a hammer on his heart. Marco Braga began investigating the woman. What he found changed everything. Sister Justina, real name, Justina Maria Barcelos. But that's just the surface. She used to be a psychologist in an NGO investigated for international adoption trafficking, disappeared from records for 5 years, reappeared as a nun in a fringe congregation out in the countryside. "You're saying she's part of a scheme?" "I'm saying she is the scheme." Worse, her name showed up in a confidential 2007 report linked to an organization called Instituto São Clemente. Alberto's eyes widened. São Clemente. That was the name of the ship where my daughter disappeared. The piece fit. The board now showed the face behind the cross, a child re-education project funded by businessmen and authorities, where at-risk children were taken aboard retreats and vanished. "And get this," Marco added, "the main funder of the institute was none other than Dom Mauricio de Astorga, a cardinal, influential, and a friend of your old powerful friends." "I know that name," whispered Alberto, "and you're going to know it even more, because he's the man who watched your escape through the camera." Now everything made sense. The sealed casket, the marked bracelet, the nun in the van, the note in the pocket. It was all part of a project with the name of charity and the soul of a kidnapping. "And the worst part," Marco said, slapping a dossier on the table, "that Dom Mauricio has just been nominated to the Vatican. He's about to become an archbishop with international power." Alberto punched the wall. "That man stole my daughter, scrubbed her memory, and now what? He wants a blessing?" But Marco had one more bomb to drop. "What if I told you she wasn't the only one?" Silence. "There are more. There's a list, and on it, over 30 children reported missing in accidents aboard ships, colonies, spiritual retreats, all with inconclusive fatality reports, all somehow tied to the San Clemente Foundation. And then came the final blow. Alberto, one of the names on that list, you'll recognize. Who? Beatriz Fontes, your wife. Oh, ChatGPT dice, Beatriz? My wife? Alberto gasped, his voice nearly cracking. Marco nodded solemnly. Before marrying you, she was the legal guardian of a girl named Clara. The girl disappeared at a summer camp. The case was buried. And guess who signed the death certificate? No, Dom Mauricio. It was a gut punch that knocked the breath out of him. His pain wasn't new, it was inherited, and his wife may have been involved from the beginning. Now Alberto didn't just have a daughter to protect. He had to uncover the truth about the woman he had loved and a past that had been carefully erased. Meanwhile, in the grand halls of the Vatican, Dom Mauricio was preparing a global address. The war was officially declared, but only one side knew a battle had even begun. Some people walked to the altar with such filth on their soul, not even 1,000 kneeling priests could wash off the shame. And Dom Mauricio, with his golden ring and porcelain smile, was about to be enthroned as Archbishop of the Vatican, carrying on his shoulders a procession of vanished children. Alberto Fontes was no longer a grieving millionaire. He was a father at war, and like any wounded father, he was ready to burn the world down if that's what it took. Behind the scenes, Marco Braga had secured access to files hidden in a convent under emergency renovation, which in truth housed decades-old documents on spiritual-assisted adoptions. Among the mold-scented, blood-stained papers, one handwritten letter stood out, dated 1998, signed by Beatriz Fontes. To the director of Project Clemente, I authorize the transfer of the minor Clara G to the institution's care under full confidentiality, with faith that it is for the salvation of the child's soul. Alberto read the letter 3 times. The paper trembled in his hands. My wife took part in this? Marco nodded. She didn't just participate. She delivered the first child, and months later joined the Fontes family. You mean she knew? Apparently yes, but there's more. She vanished just before Carolina's accident. Remember? I remember. They said she went to visit a cousin in Italy. Lies. She spent 3 weeks at a retreat run by Dom Mauricio himself. We've got photos, records of entry. And the most curious thing? She left with no recent memory. A medical report calls it transient amnesia due to acute stress. That was before or after Carolina's death, 2 days before. Alberto staggered back, sat down, ran his hands across his face like trying to scrub the truth off his skin. She was manipulated, or she was complicit. Marco didn't answer, because by now there was no more certainty, only scars. On television, the world watched Dom Mauricio's arrival in Rome. Flowers, applause, children dressed in white chanting in Latin, and him in embroidered vestments declaring, "The future of faith lies in the hands of innocence." Hypocrisy smells like expensive cologne. But what Dom Mauricio didn't know was that Alberto held a trump card. Inside the dossier Marco had uncovered, there was a letter of denunciation, signed by one of the missing nuns from the FSR convent. In it, she detailed a program of indoctrination, identity erasure, and the forced disappearance of children selected for confidential international adoption. And at the bottom of the letter, a protocol number. What's this? Alberto asked. It's a Vatican authentication code. It means the document was received and read, but filed away as pastorally inconvenient. This is proof. This is dynamite. Alberto called his last remaining contact in journalism, Leandro Sá, investigative reporter from TV Mundial. I've got a scoop, but if you bury this story, I'll make you eat your rosary, bead by bead. Give it to me, Fontes, I swear. This will reach the world. The report aired the next day. Red banners, footage of the white van, photo of the bracelet, Sister Dolores's testimony, and the list of 33 children disappeared under religious protection. The impact was immediate, but the most unexpected part came at the end. An old, yellowed photo appeared on the screen. Dom Mauricio, in plain vestments, smiling beside a curly-haired child, with very, very familiar eyes. The journalist commented, "According to our sources, this child was never officially identified, but image analysis shows a 99.2% resemblance to Alberto Fontes's daughter." And for the first time, the name Carolina Fontes echoed through the corridors of the Vatican. Dom Mauricio didn't show up for Mass the next morning. They said he was in seclusion for prayer. But anyone who knows this game knows when a priest hides, he's either in sin or about to be exposed. There are times God remains silent, but the people scream. And when the truth explodes inside the altar, not even a stone saint can hold the ceiling up. The story of Carolina set the world on fire. International media outlets aired the report on loop. Protests flared outside St. Peter's Basilica. Journalists camped outside convent gates across the globe. But what no one expected was what happened to Alberto Fontes. The man once labeled an eccentric, grief-stricken billionaire was now seen as the father who took on the church and survived. The pressure grew so intense that the Vatican called for an emergency press conference. Dom Mauricio appeared, pale, but still wearing that same voice, one that confuses guilt with sanctity. The accusation of involvement with missing minors is a slander driven by personal grief and vengeance. Our mission has always been to care for the vulnerable. Alberto watched from the shadows of a quiet room, hand in hand with Carolina, who now slept beside her teddy bear and music box, like a story paused but not yet finished. But the end began that very night. Marco Braga's encrypted phone lit up. It was Leandro Sa. The material you gave us triggered a chain reaction. What kind of reaction? A former employee of the San Clemente Institute just delivered the original list. And 72 names, children, cities, nuns, coordinators. But most importantly, it includes Carolina's real birth certificate with her original hospital fingerprint and a second forged certificate under the name Clara M. da Silva. Alberto froze. Clara? The name of the first girl your wife Beatrice gave to the project. Everything fell into place. The girl named Clara, handed over by Beatrice, was never forgotten. She was recycled. And years later, when Beatrice had Carolina, the project came calling again. Whether out of guilt, coercion, or fear, she yielded, or was forced. The worst part for Alberto was accepting that the woman he loved may have helped build his own nightmare. But now he had the proof, and he wasn't going to ask for permission to show it. The next morning, Alberto went live on one of the country's biggest television programs. He held up the bracelet, read the note, displayed the real birth certificate, and finally showed a photo of Carolina with the same clothes, same eyes, as the child the world had seen on the news days before. This is my daughter. They stole her from me, lied, made her forget her own name. And now they want to call me crazy. Let them, because my madness led me to her. And no robe will stop me from shouting it. The reaction was instant. Within the week, the Vatican launched an internal investigation. Dom Mauricio was suspended indefinitely pending conduct review. The white van was seized, 3 nuns were arrested, and 5 more children were identified and rescued. But what nobody saw coming was the video leak, a recording made by Dom Mauricio himself years earlier. He said, "Children without roots are fresh seeds. Their memory is wet clay. We can shape them, recreate, and return them to the world purified." The footage struck like lightning in an already cracked sky. That same day, Alberto Fontes founded something no amount of money could buy, the Carolina Foundation, a center offering psychological and legal support to children subjected to religious manipulation and illegal adoptions. There, no child was ever called orphan. There, every memory was restored, even the painful ones. And Carolina? She went back to school, underwent therapy, and when people asked how she survived, she answered, because someone believed in what no one wanted to hear. And that name they tried to erase, it became a school, a law, a symbol. Because some people are born invisible, but weren't born to live erased. The ripple effect of Carolina's story shook foundations long believed unshakable. But like every rotten structure, once it cracks, it reveals what was always behind the facade. The Carolina Foundation, created by Alberto, became a sanctuary, but it also became a target. In the first week alone, 4 break-in attempts, 2 anonymous health code complaints, 1 surprise audit, and an envelope left at the gate. No return address. Inside, a photo. It showed Carolina, alone, at a park, her face circled in red ink, with a handwritten message, "Those who scream, disappear." Marco Braga called Alberto immediately. This isn't just a threat, it's a signature, from people who still wear clean collars and have blood on their hands. They don't just want to silence the girl, they want to erase her memory again. That's when Alberto realized there were still names hidden. Sponsors, patrons, men in suits and crosses who never stood in front of a camera, but signed every order behind one. And then came the first informant. He showed up disguised as a beggar, left an envelope with Marco. Inside, a flash drive and a note. "If something happens to me, give this to the federal prosecutors and pray." The contents? Hidden camera footage, secret meetings, testimonies, and the complete list of Project Clemente's financiers, the same project that had stolen Carolina and so many others. Among the names, 2 government ministers, 3 federal judges, and 1 Brazilian archbishop with a permanent seat in Rome. Now the truth had names and ID numbers. But if you thought this brought peace, that was the moment hell truly began. Some truths don't get buried with flowers. They get buried in unmarked graves. Just like the dozens of children whose lives were snuffed out with holy water and paperwork. But Alberto didn't want stage show justice. He wanted open grave justice. With the flash drive in hand, he and Marco went straight to the federal prosecutor's office. The reaction? Immediate. "If this goes public, it'll collapse half the judiciary and the top of the CNBB. "Then let it collapse," Alberto replied. "I've already buried a living daughter. I don't fear any grave." That night, Carolina had a nightmare. "Daddy, I dreamed about a girl who had my face, but a different name. She was asking for help, but no one could see her." Alberto went pale. Clara, the first girl Beatriz had surrendered, the one everyone forgot, the one who, maybe, had been reused. Marco had a dark theory. What if the project did something worse, Alberto? Worse how? What if they used Carolina as emotional substitution, as a replacement? No, they erased her memory. She went through the maternal silence treatment. Maybe she's both. The idea was cruel, monstrous. But the documents from the flash drive confirmed the worst. Detailed reports on identity fragmentation techniques, psychological conditioning to instill new backstories in small children, experiments on memory suppression under religious cover, and the signature at the bottom, Dr. Vinicius Cerdera, author of 4 reports, missing since 2012. But the following week, a letter arrived at the Carolina Foundation, handwritten, shaky script. "If you want to understand what we did, meet me at Lapa Cemetery, grave 172, Tuesday, 11 p.m. It was him, and Alberto went, with Marco, and a hidden recorder. What they heard that night turned pain into rage. Because the doctor didn't just know everything, he had designed it. There are people who don't kill with knives. They kill with silence, with absence, with a clipboard and a badge. And Dr. Vinicius Cerdera was one of them. At Lapa Cemetery, next to a grave with no flowers and no name, he stood waiting, worn-out suit, hollow eyes, the face of a man who hadn't slept in years and maybe didn't deserve to. "Mr. Fontes," he said, like no time had passed. "Speak," Alberto said coldly. "What did you do to my daughter?" Vinicius sighed, pulled a yellowed notebook from his coat, handed it over. "This is a clinical log, notes from 2006 to 2009. What's in here? Proof that your daughter underwent 9 sessions of religious cognitive reprogramming." "What?" "A protocol approved by members of the Congregation of Purity. The child is exposed to repeated visual, auditory, and narrative stimuli about abandonment, rebirth, and divine salvation." "Mgl, what were you trying to do?" Marco snapped. "Create the perfect child, the obedient orphan, a rootless soul, ready to be molded by a new family. That's psychological torture." Vinicius nodded. Yes, but with a prayer before and after. The cynicism hit like a slap. Alberto clutched the notebook tightly. Inside were drawings by Carolina, burning houses, scratched out names, and one sentence repeated again and again, "I am no one. God will give me a new name." Alberto's voice was a whisper now. "And Clara?" Vinicius hesitated, looked around, then said, "Clara died at 4 years old. Pneumonia." "Liar! It's true." But Beatrice couldn't handle the guilt. She tried to make amends by having another child. Carolina was the promise she made to the project, a second chance, a pure vessel. "So Carolina is my daughter, but also the shadow of the child my wife lost." "Yes." And when Beatrice tried to back out, she was silenced. Her amnesia wasn't natural. It was induced. Alberto collapsed to his knees. He didn't sob. He shook with the silent kind of grief that rots the spine. "Why?" he asked, broken. "Why would you do this?" Vinicius looked down. "Because faith, Mr. Fontes, when it becomes a product, needs packaging. And children were just that to them, gift wrap for a doctrine with no name." Marco was recording every word, but what came next was even crueler. Carolina was labeled a therapeutic failure. She remembered too much. She cried. She resisted. "That's why you dumped her at the stoplight. That's why she was abandoned as an indigent, but not without a watcher. The nun was there to observe. She was considered high-risk material. And the button in the bear." Vinicius closed his eyes. "I sewed it myself. It was my apology." Silence fell. Even the dead seemed to listen. Alberto rose to his feet, looked the man in the eye, and said, "You think you feel remorse, but what you are is a grave digger of living souls." Dr. Vinicius Cerdeira was arrested 3 days later. After the recording was submitted, he confessed, signed everything. But that wasn't justice. Justice had yet to touch the ones who paid the bills, signed the orders, gave the blessings, because sometimes the hand that gives the blessing is the same one that covers the mouth of a screaming child. As the truth spread like wildfire, the official silence only grew louder. The Vatican released a brief, marble-cold statement. "We are aware of the documents presented and reaffirm our commitment to truth. Until further notice, we consider the reports to be partial and unverified interpretations." Interpretations. After dozens of reports, videos, witnesses, still interpretations. But while the golden rings tried to protect the fingers that wore them, public opinion had already chosen its side. The Carolina Foundation exploded with support, thousands of messages, donations, letters from parents, survivors, people who'd been part of similar projects. Then a woman arrived. Her name, Ana Lucia. She showed a photo of her daughter, same bracelet, same nun from the van. "She vanished in 2014. They told me she drowned. I was never allowed to see the body." "Where did this happen?" Marco asked. "At the same place, Instituto San Clemente." With every new testimony, the pit grew deeper, but no one was prepared and for the return of Beatriz Fontes. The woman who had vanished after the first media wave was found, alive, in a psychiatric clinic in Switzerland. Journalists tracked her down, and when they asked why she never spoke up, she answered with a single heart-shattering phrase, "Because they promised me that if I stayed silent, I could still have a daughter." The interview went viral, and the church's image collapsed like stained glass hit by a stone. The Pope, under pressure from all directions, announced an independent international commission. But while Rome wrote reports, Carolina wrote letters, tiny letters, that she left at the foundation for the other children being found. "You're not alone. Your name is still alive. I remembered my dad. You'll remember yours too." And those letters started healing wounds. But for Alberto, the deepest wound still bled. He was missing a name, the name behind the financing, the forbidden name. And it came. In Dr. Vinicius Cerdeira's final court deposition, who funded the project, A business group called Fraternitas Lux. What kind of company? A multinational in Christian education, headquartered in Switzerland, branches in Brazil, Italy, Poland. Who founded it? Silence. Until finally, Gustavo Fontes. Alberto went pale. What? Your brother, Mr. Fontes. Silence. The brother he hadn't seen in 20 years, the business partner who vanished in their youth, the brilliant theologian, the missionary benefactor. He was the real architect. That night, Alberto didn't sleep. He sat in Carolina's room, watched her sleep, and asked himself, how many times do we look into the eyes of our own blood and fail to see the monster hiding inside? Some families are safe harbors, others are shipwrecks. Alberto Fontes never imagined the final enemy of his crusade would carry his own last name. Gustavo Fontes, the little brother, once his business partner, the theology prodigy who left it all behind to serve God, now stood revealed as the mastermind behind a worldwide child reprogramming operation cloaked in charity. Photos of the two brothers flooded global news, smiling side by side in their 20s. Now, decades later, one rebuilding a life, the other dismantling dozens. Testimonies poured in. Former employees of Fraternitas Lux confirmed that Gustavo oversaw adoption reformation models. But what they described wasn't reformation. It was erasure of memory, of identity, of origin. And worst of all, it was all justified through twisted scripture, baptism under coercion, and praise songs used like anesthesia. When Alberto heard the name, he didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't punch the wall. He packed a suitcase and flew to Geneva. He requested a meeting with Gustavo, who, protected by lawyers and diplomatic shields, had yet to be arrested. They met in a glass-walled office, two brothers, but the space between them was wider than any prison cell. You, Alberto said, calm but sharp as a blade, you destroyed our family. I saved children, Gustavo replied, serene. You erased names. I gave them purpose. You stole my daughter. Gustavo tilted his head. She needed to be born again, far from the sin of the world. She was born in love. The sin came from you. Gustavo smiled, that dry, unsettling smile of someone who believes evil can be excused if it's dressed in holiness. One day, people will understand. They will, Alberto said. When you're behind bars, and my daughter is graduating free and writing books about the name you tried to erase. A long pause. Just before Alberto stood, he added, Carolina has something you'll never have, Gustavo. What's that? Forgiveness. Days later, Gustavo Fontes was arrested. Interpol agents led him out in cuffs. Footage aired in over 40 countries. Fraternitas Lux was dissolved. Authorities raided secret spiritual colonies in Brazil, Italy, and Poland. 80 children were rescued. Over half were reunited with their families. And Carolina, she grew, graduated in psychology, opened a special wing at the Carolina Foundation to care for adults who had been victims as children. One day, a reporter asked her, how did you recover from everything? She smiled, not a rehearsed smile, a real one, and said, I didn't recover. I rebuilt myself with the love of a father and the strength of knowing who I am. And in the same place where there was once silence and fear, now rang the laughter of children. Real laughter. Laughter with a name, with a story, with a future. Because in the end, as the old man on the porch always says, some people are born invisible, but when truth touches them, not even heaven can look away. So, what did you think of this story, huh? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like to help this channel grow, and subscribe so you don't miss more incredible stories like this one. Until next time, from your rich grandpa.